Australia, the sixth largest country on Earth. An ancient, rugged, and unforgiving land with abundant animal life, both beautiful and deadly. Found within its awe-inspiring landscapes and natural beauty exists a deep history of unexplained mysteries for anyone with the courage to investigate them. Tonight, we join Ben on a journey across this vast island continent in search of answers to events that have reshaped the lives of so many that have been exposed to Unexplained Phenomena Australia. With your host, Ben Hurle.
Hello and good evening. It's Ben here from Unexplained Phenomena Australia, and I'd love to welcome you to this episode. And I think I'm going to do something slightly different tonight, but it's actually today here in Australia, and it's about 6 o'clock in the morning, so that's a little bit strange, and I'm drinking my morning coffee before I go to work. And I thought, well, now's the perfect time to sit down and record what hopefully will be an incredibly interesting show. So we're going to do what's called a paranormal freestyle, which means I'm going to go over quite a few different topics and different encounters with different phenomena that is here in Australia. And all of it is pretty much uniquely Australian. And I hope I've got a few things in here that you've never heard of before. So what are we going to talk about? We're going to talk about the Hook Island sea monster. Now that sounds quite mysterious. The Hook Island sea monster. We're going to talk about the horned man of Circular Quay in Sydney. Another mysterious incident. We're going to talk about Fisher's Ghost, which is a brief little piece on a famous Australian ghost. So you'll have to listen to that. It's one of the first ghost stories that I ever heard in Australia when I was a child, and I want to share that with you tonight. We're also going to have a look at Wilga's Whaling Waterhole. Now that sounds interesting as well. Wilga's Whaling Waterhole. What is that exactly? It is essentially a billabong, or a small body of water from which strange and unusual and terrifying screams are emitted. And this place is closed to the public, so we'll have a chat about that. We're going to talk about the famous Min Min lights, which you may have heard of, particularly if you live in Australia. And the Min Min lights are a phenomenon that exists out in northwestern Queensland primarily, but they have appeared in other areas as well, in New South Wales. I think I've seen it myself. It's even here in Victoria. And we're going to talk about another really strange location in Australia called Black Mountain, which is an ominous name. And that is up in Queensland, far north Queensland. So it's a bit of a Queensland focus today, which is interesting. And the last thing, if I get to it, I'll put it in case we need it, the Tully Saucer Nest, which is also fairly close to Black Mountain. So the Tully Saucer Nest was a famous case that occurred in 1966 in Queensland. So if we don't get to that today, we'll again throw it into another episode down the track. So what I thought we'd do, we'd start off with a little bit of a look at the Hook Island monster. So it just sounds amazing, just that name alone, the Hook Island monster. So where did this strange incident occur? I'm going to give you a picture now. So here, so this is the map of Australia, and up where the red dropper is where it occurred, up in the beautiful islands of the Great Barrier Reef, where the water is just beautifully blue and amazing beaches. So that's where this particular incident occurred. So not out at sea, not in the cold Arctic waters or anything like that. This is up in paradise, Australian paradise. And what is Hook Island? Well, this is Hook Island here. So it makes up a part of the Whitsunday Islands, and even the island's shape is a really interesting shape. I reckon that'd make it almost a cool tattoo. It's a really interesting shaped island with those sort of peninsulas that sort of jut out. So it's almost like the Lost World in some ways. And whereabouts on Hook Island did this incident occur? It occurred over here, where that red dot is. This is where this Hook Island sea monster actually appeared. And this, again, is a bit of a more of a close-up of that area. So very interesting indeed. So what actually happened? What was the Hook Island sea monster incident? So a man named Robert Lesserac, his family, and a friend of his called Henk de Jong, they actually were wrecked on that particular island. They'd bought a motorboat and they decided to spend 3 months on Hook Island, and they were crossing that Stonehaven Bay, that last image that I just showed you, on December the 12th, 1964, when Robert Lesserac's wife spotted a strange object on the lagoon floor. So it's fairly shallow, very clear water. And what it was a gigantic tadpole-like creature. And they estimated it to be about 30 feet long, which would be 3 Bigfoots. That was their initial estimation. They took several still photographs of this giant tadpole, for want of a better word, and they gradually moved closer to it. And eventually, Robert and Henk, they plucked up enough courage to approach this thing sitting just under the water in order to film it. And it proved larger than they first thought, with its estimated length now increased to 75 to 80 feet. So that's a few Bigfoots more. It did not move, and they suspected that it might be dead, just laying there in the shallows. But as Robert Lesserac started to film, it opened its mouth and made movements towards them. So they were in the water and they returned to the boat. And by the time they got to the boat, the creature had decided to go in another direction. There seemed to be a large pale region, which they interpreted as a wound, visible on the right side of the tail. And it was suggested that this was caused by maybe a ship's propeller and had caused the animal to take rest and refuge in the shallow bay. The eyes located on the top of the head and well away from the front and the snout were pale and possessed slit-shaped pupils. Mostly black in colour, the animal had brown transverse stripes and its skin was smooth in texture. It possessed no fins nor spines of any kind, and they didn't see any teeth inside the white mouth of this creature. You've got to love a sea monster story. You really do. And this is what a paranormal freestyle is. Let's just throw it up there. Let's talk about it. Let's see what it is. So I'm going to show you a couple more photos, and we'll eventually lead into the Hook Island monster itself. So this is a generic stock shot of men on a boat in that very bay. And as you can see, it's a beautiful water, lovely foliage, high mountaintops, and it just looks really beautiful. You certainly don't need a winter coat up in the Whitsundays. This is another picture of that area around Hook Island. And also this picture here is one of my favorites. That makes me want to jump on a domestic plane and fly up there for a holiday. But it is a really beautiful area. And another shot. There we go. So that's what you're talking about. That's the territory where the Hook Island monster actually appeared. So now Robert Sirac, was a professional photographer, and this was taken in 1964. This is well before Photoshop, well before deep fakes, Photoshop sort of imagery. And the photo itself is a really good photo. Just a quick drink of coffee. It's an absolutely fantastic looking picture, and it was spread widely around the globe. And you might be sitting there, if you haven't beat me on Google already, and you already Googled this, and you know a little bit about cryptids, then this monster it's a pretty famous picture. And it was only when I was sort of like having a bit of a look around and see what can I find on weird things in Australia that this popped up, and I thought, yes, I do remember this picture, seeing it when I was a lot younger. There was speculation that this was a forgery and a fake, that this was a hoax, that this was, and it's never been proved either way that it was a hoax or this actually was a real creature. And I think Robert Le Sirac was a guy of semi-dubious character at the time, but the picture itself is really good, and the proposed explanations for explaining it as a hoax, to me, didn't seem that practical or logistical. But as an investigator, I'm open to the possibility of hoax as much as anything. And you have to be prepared for letdowns when things like this are presented, because it's a really great photo. So let's have a look at this picture. They took a series of photos, but this is probably the most famous one. So it's coming up. There it is. That is the Hook Island sea monster. So it's this black, long, presumably the tail seems to go a fair way around towards the boat. So to my mind, that would be, I don't know, that's to say that was plastic bags in the water full of sand. I mean, I presume it's possible, but it seems like an awful lot of trouble to go to, and I think it'd take you a fair while to set up something like that. But that's the image, and this is before Photoshop. So it is a famous photo, very, very famous photo, and at the time, it did go worldwide. So, and this is another image or series of images that bring the head up a little closer in the photo, and you can see the eyes. So the center picture shows the eyes fairly well, and the shape of the head. And then the third photo, which is from a slightly different angle, shows the head with two distinct eyes on it. This black tadpole creature, and this is a rather cute sort of an illustration of not what happened at all, but it gives you the general idea. And here is what I think is a much better photo of the Hook Island sea monster, how it may have potentially actually looked. So, and I think that the head shape on the right is probably a little closer than the one on the left, which definitely makes it look a little bit more tadpole. So there you go. That's the start of the Paranormal Freestyle, the Hook Island sea monster. Check it out. Do some more Googling on it if you are interested in cryptids and you are interested in sea monsters. It's a very fascinating incident, potentially. But I'm impressed with the photo. Like, it's for 1964, trying to pull off a fake in 1964. It's either a brilliant idea, as in let's go up to the shallow, clear waters and stack some sandbags out. But the photo itself, and I'll just bring it back up again. It's a great image. There's definitely something submerged below that water. One of the other theories was that it was little fish, but I don't buy into that either. I don't think it's a shoal of fish either. I mean, the shape is pretty unique, and yeah, little fish do shoal around. They do, but it's a mystery, and that's what we're all on the UNX network for, is because we love mysteries, and the Hook Island monster, sea monster, is right up there. Moving along with the paranormal freestyle, we're going to head on to now talking about the Horned Man of Circular Quay, Sydney. Wow, the Horned, you couldn't get a better tabloid, could you? The Horned Man of Circular Quay. Now, this is associated with a tragedy, a really horrific event, this particular Australian mystery. So, on the night of the 9th of June, 1979, a fire broke out at Luna Park on appropriately what was called the Ghost Ride at Luna Park in Sydney. So this is Luna Park. We'll have a bit of a look at that. So that's Luna Park in Sydney. If you've ever been to Sydney, it's right near the Harbour Bridge on the northern shores, and the Sydney Opera House is on the other side, on the southern shore, and the bridge sort of interconnects that area. So that's Luna Park. It's famous. It's been there for many, many years. It's a real landmark, and Melbourne has one too. So due to a combination of low water pressure, understaffing in the park, inadequate coverage of the ghost trains, fire hose system, a fire broke out on the Ghost Ride, and the whole thing burnt to the ground. So you can imagine what that would have looked like, and it looked something like this. So right next to the roller coaster, this is in 1979, pretty funky times, and where that big blackened section is there in the center of the picture, that's where the Ghost Ride once stood. So it must have went up really, really quickly, and people died, as you would probably expect in an encounter like that. So in a tragedy like that, I should say. So here are the boys. So the Luna Park ghost train fire in June 1979, which is winter here in Australia, claimed the lives of John Godson and 6 children: Damien Godson, Craig Goodson, Richard Carroll, Michael Johnson, Jonathan Billings, and Seamus Raleigh. So an absolute tragedy. Four boys, one father, all killed, burnt to death. Absolutely horrible way to go when something fun is happening. So John's wife, who died, it's John who died, his wife, Jenny Goodson, sometime after the tragedy, this is where it gets interesting, came across some photos taken on that horrible day. And she stopped to stare at one particular photo in particular. And it was a picture of her son, Damien, one of the boys who died. And it was the last photo ever taken of Damien. And it shows the little boy shyly posing posing next to an intimidating figure wearing a demonic looking mask with horns on its head. And it was a really strange photograph. They were unable to locate the man later. And after the fact, comparisons were made between the figure and the god or demon, depending on which version of the story you read, the demon called Moloch, which is Moloch. And it's believed that Moloch prefers children to be burned alive as sacrifices. So that's really quite creepy. So was this a sinister way to offer up human sacrifices to an ancient god? So, or was it deliberate arson in a business dispute, as some others have claimed? So they've never found a cause for the for the fire, the Sydney Ghost Train fire. And so Jenny Goodson believed that something evil was at work. And that's the mother, the grieving mother. That was her opinion, that something evil was at work. But the mystery of exactly who the horned masked man was, you can tell it's morning in Australia, remains. So this guy, although the electrical faults and arson by unknown figures have been claimed, the exact cause of that fire could not be determined by a coronial inquiry. So a government inquiry could not find a reason for that fire starting. So, and the coroner also ruled that while the actions of Luna Park's management and staff before and during the fire, and in particular their choosing not to follow advice on the installation of a sprinkler system in the ride, breached their duty of care, and that charges of criminal neglect should not be laid. The case was reopened in 1987, and no new findings were made, although the police investigators and the coroner were criticised. So it was a very controversial event, tragedy. So, no one expects a huge theme park ride to be suddenly engulfed in flames and 5-6 people lose their lives. All of them, and most of them being little young boys. So let's have a look at this photo. So this is the photo and it's a really strange picture. Like I'd almost say that this was photoshopped in some ways, because you've got this young boy and he's standing next to this very demonic looking creature. Well, not creature, a man, I suppose. Definitely a man. It's a man in this suit. This is not a demon standing next to him. This is a man standing next to him, dressed in a highly motifed outfit that could certainly be interpreted. Doesn't mean it necessarily is, but it could be interpreted as a satanic image. So this is it here. So down on Circular Quay, there's the little boy, Damien Goodson, and this strange figure that was next to him, wearing this really creepy mask and headpiece, if you want to call it that. It almost looks ceremonial to me, rather than something that was, and there wasn't anything on that day. There was no parade or anything like that. And of course, Sydney, if you've ever been to Sydney, you could bump into anyone walking around down there. There's no question about it. But the police, they searched, and there's a longer shot of him. So he's wearing a loincloth and feathers around his arm, a fairly muscular body. And the young child is sort of staring off. He's got his hand on the child's shoulder, but the child's not engaged with him. The child's staring furtively off into the distance. So it's a very creepy picture. And a totally unexplained photo. And I'm not suggesting that he was not there when the photo was taken. I firmly believe that photo was taken next to that man, but he's not actually really, the boy I'm talking about is not looking at or engaging with that creature and with the man. And it's not like he's dressed there in a Mickey Mouse suit or something. That it's a fairly sinister looking outfit. So I'd never really heard of this before, and I sort of thought, wow, that's fascinating, a really fascinating mystery. And the police looked and searched and appealed. They did everything they could to find this guy, and he never came forward. And no other witnesses came forward to say that, that was John such and such. He was there, such and such. So this guy never appeared. So the mother sort of got really suspicious that this was actually going on. We have to move on. I can talk about that for a lot longer, but we'll move on because this is a paranormal freestyle. So now we're going to talk about Fisher's ghost. So this is a very famous ghost story in Australia. Well, it was famous. It was famous when I was a kid. It's probably still famous, but like all things, gets forgotten as time rolls on. So in June 1826, a gentleman called Frederick Fisher, a businessman who hailed from Campbelltown, which is in Sydney, basically, went missing while lodging with a man named William George Worrell. This is in 1826, long time ago. In October, his body was finally discovered. So he went missing in June, and his body was discovered in October on Worrell's own neighbouring property. It was a violent and bloody murder, and later sightings of a ghostly figure in and around Campbelltown led many to believe that Fisher's ghost had returned to wander the earth. So the urban legend goes it was Fisher's own ghost that helped police uncover the grisly remains of his body. After the ghost appeared to a drunk named Farley and guided him towards the badly hidden body. Now, why you would choose a drunk and not Sherlock Holmes or a police inspector is a bit of a mystery, but the ghost appeared to this man, Farley, who was drunk. And to commemorate the story, the Campbelltown City Council holds a regular festival in Fisher's honour. They even have their own cartoonish ghostly mascot named Fred that joins in the festivities. So that's interesting as well. And this is a classic image of the ghost. I'm sure it wasn't exactly like that, but apparently the ghost did appear near the location of the body. And it was saying, hey, I've been murdered and I'm not very happy about it. And I'm in this area. So that was interesting. That's a short one for you because we've got to keep the paranormal freestyle rolling along and I can't get bogged down. Wilga's Wailing Waterhole. This is a really strange phenomenon or mystery. So Williger's Wailing Waterhole. I just love all those W's first and foremost. So where the hell was that? That's here. So the Hook Island Monster was just up near Cairns there, a bit further up there on the coast, and really honing in on Queensland. And down here in Western Queensland, where the little red drop pin is, that's where Williger's Wailing Waterhole is. And it's still there today. So it's about 100 kilometres south of Longreach in central Queensland is this unremarkable waterhole. And it's unremarkable. I'll show you a picture of it before too long. And it's on the Barcoo River called the Williger Watering Hole. And it's pretty much in the middle of nowhere. And it's so inconspicuous and mundane that most people walk right by it without even giving it a second thought. And you would. Yet this particular waterhole has achieved quite a reputation for being an ominous and haunted place that has terrified locals and travellers for years with its eerie wailings and other strange phenomena. According to the local legends, tales of something spooky going on at Williger Waterhole have been going on since at least the mid-1800s, when bushmen would often tell of a blood-curdling scream and devilish, unearthly shrieking at night from the vicinity of that waterhole, usually rising in volume until they were nearly ear-piercing before stopping to bring silence crashing down again. Silence crashing down. Most people in the area knew better to avoid the cursed waterhole, but according to law, one of the most well-known stories of the hole involved a couple who actually decided to build a shack at the hole sometime in the 1890s. Well, if that's not inviting trouble, then what is building a shack at the waterhole? Even though everybody knows there's something really weird going on there. So a new hand employed at Ruthven Station built a slab and bark hut near the waterhole. And he brought his wife out to live there. She was your typical bushwoman for the time, sensible, practical, and accustomed to all her life to the loneliness of the outback, because the outback is lonely. Like if you're out there, there ain't nothing else out there. And the couple had been there for a short time, and when one night the husband arrived home late, having been delayed, to find his wife in a state of collapse. She could tell him of nothing she had seen, but the most appalling shrieks had come from the watering hole. He felt that she'd imagined the cries of some nocturnal bird to be ghostly shrieks and yells. And soon after this episode, the station hand was away for 2 nights. And on arriving home, he found that his wife was hysterical, crying and sobbing. And she told him of the terrible screaming and wailing at the waterhole that had caused her to almost lose her reason or go mad. He arrived at the hut early on the morning on his return to find that his wife was in a semi-demented condition. So she had really freaked out. And she told between fits of hysteria, of sobbing, of the shrieking and the wailing and screaming from the waterhole. And he took her. So very soon after that, she wasn't happy to stay there anymore. They moved away and no one has ever lived there again. So, wow, what is this really strange place in the middle of nowhere? And another popular account of the waterhole comes from the 1890s. And on this occasion, it seemed that a pair of 2 shearers who had camped there had a rather terrifying experience at the hole. So for those of you who don't know, shearers are men who take the wool off sheep. So in Australia, we call them shearers. So these 2 men who were camped at the waterhole had a particularly terrifying experience. They had heard the stories about the haunted watering hole, but they didn't believe any of it until they'd experienced it for themselves. So over a roaring log fire, they had sat and swapped stories and waited, and their skepticism with each hour that slipped by. And at 11 o'clock that night, a wild bellow brought both men to their feet, and they spread out to see what manner of beast had uttered it. There was laughter when it was found that the bellowing had come from an old bull wandering in the neighbourhood. Well, that's one thing. And billies were put on the fire, and they brewed tea. After drinking their tea and smoking and talking for a bit longer, it was announced by one man that midnight was almost upon them, and that if anything was going to happen, it would, following by ghostly traditions, happen around midnight. And so it was unanimously decided that once midnight passed, they would all declare the ghost of the Williga waterhole to be non-existent, turn into their blankets and sleep. Midnight passed, and not even the voice of the old bull broke the bush silence. And accordingly, they put away their pipes, rolled their blankets, and settled down beside the dying fire. And every man was pretty much soon asleep. This is a true campfire story. None of them heard the first distance wail, but in a few seconds, as the wailing increased in pitch, every man was out of his blanket and on his feet. Suddenly there came a soft, distant wailing that grew rapidly, nearer and louder. The cries appeared to be all different keys, devilish, unearthly shrieking, such as no human voice had ever uttered. The screaming was now ringing in their ears at a deafening pitch and was definitely coming from the waterhole. The shearers thought their eardrums would burst, and they were too terrified to move. Then, to their relief, the shrieking diminished in volume until it was merely a weird wailing. Never heard of weird wailing, but I'm sure that's what they heard. And moments later, it ceased utterly. And once more, the bush was deathly silent. So, and when the men told their story at the shearing shed, it was received with derision by most. But others mentioned that the Williga watering hole was a notorious spot and that the Aborigines always avoided it. So if the Aborigines don't go there, you can be sure there's a reason. Some of the old shearing hands said that horses were scared of it, and drovers or cattlemen or cowboys admitted that they never could get the cattle to rest there. So you got this watering hole, and the cows never wanted to rest at this watering hole. So there were instances where cattle driven from distant parts had arrived there almost exhausted, but had stampeded at sundown. So there's apparently no birds, no wildlife of any kind. Cattle and sheep and horses refuse to go near it. So it's a very mysterious place. And another account from a rancher said, I did not believe in ghosts, but I've heard the screams, which have been so much discussed. And I know for a fact that stock will not camp on the banks of the Williga waterhole. On one occasion, I tried to camp a mob of old cows, quite close to the watering hole. Most of them were milkers, and I thought that nothing would frighten them. You know, the slow old milking cows, pretty sleepy. Everything went well until about 9 p.m. Then they started to rush and ring. In the morning, we were a good 3 miles from camp. The horses also made a break during the night and were found with the hobbles, standing shivering in a corner about 5 miles from the camp. So nothing would stay near the Williga watering hole with its crazy wailing and screaming and shrieking. So it's a really strange phenomena. And here is a picture of the actual watering hole. So I'll just bring it up now. There it is. How innocuous is that? It obviously goes up and down with levels of water levels depending on rainfall, but that's the watering hole, and its exact location has always been a bit of a secret. But there has been some work done, and I've found the actual spot. So I've gone onto Google, and there's a little town called Innisford, which is over here, and then there is this where that little drop pin is. That's the actual location of the watering hole out here. So I was able to track down some geographical GPS coordinates on the location of the watering hole. So there is the watering hole. So it's a classic Australian mystery. So, and there's sort of different theories as to what causes it, like these unearthly noises, that they're caused by a subterranean channel. The channel perhaps connecting the Williga to other channels, and under certain conditions, when the water rushes through, it causes the shrieking and the yelling. But there's been no proof to say that this is indeed the case. You know, people have claimed that it's birds and things like that, but bushmen know birds. Come on, you can't tell me that it's birds, because cattlemen and people who live out in the outback, they know all the wildlife. So this is almost like an ear-splitting wailing that occurs from this watering hole. So that's another story from the Paranormal Freestyle. So I'm just going to do a little bit of a time check here and see how much time I've got left. So the next one to move on to is the Min Min lights. Now I could do a whole episode purely on the Min Min lights. So I'm going to make this a little shorter than I had sort of planned for, but we're going to talk about the Min Min lights. So when you're driving on the dusty roads out in central Western Queensland, between the small town of Boulia and Winton, there is a glowing light or lights that might appear as you drive out there, hovering just beyond the reach of your car's high beams. And the ethereal orb will just tantalizingly follow you, behind you, in front of you, to the side of you, as you move through the Australian red centre. And just when you think you've caught up to the Min Min light, it moves away somewhere else, just out of reach, always daring you to follow the Min Min light. So, where does the Min Min light appear? Well, here we are in Queensland, and where the red dot is, that's the small town of Boulia, right out there in Western Queensland. So it's a real mystery. And this is a picture of the local Aboriginal people, with whom the lights would be well familiar to them, looking up into the night sky. And there's even a sign out there. And this is it. For the next 120 kilometres, you are in the land of the Min Min light. This unsolved modern mystery is a light that at times follows travellers for long distances. It has been approached, but never identified. Erected by the Boulia Shire Council in the interest of tourism. In the interest of tourism, it's not exactly a warning per se. It didn't say danger or beware, because that'd keep the tourists away. But here it is, the Min Min light. And it has other names as well. It's also called Paddy's Lantern, Quinn's Light, Will-o'-the-Wisp, Jack-o'-lantern, Ghost Lights. So this is an image of a stockman. The old chap told me it was a Min Min light. It will lead ye to destruction, he said. So there's the two bushmen and the light dancing just out beyond the trees. This little light that's very curious about what you're up to. And so they've been a mystery since Stockman first sighted them in 1918. And there have been hundreds of sightings since, and all report that some shimmering phenomenon. And it's the name is rumoured to have come from an infamous outback hotel, known for being a notorious shanty. And this is a reconstructed image of it here. So this is the Min Min Hotel. So that's what it used to look like, and it was a bit of a notorious watering hole back in the day. But the phenomenon appears as south as Berrawaring in western New South Wales, as far north as Boulia, and the majority of sightings are reported to have occurred in what's called Channel Country, and it's also reported down in South Australia in an area called Yunta, which is centred within a low-lying basin noted for recording extreme heat. So the counts of the light's appearance have varied quite significantly, and they're described as a fuzzy disc-shaped light that appears to hover just above the horizon. They're often described as being white, though some accounts describe them as changing colour from white to red and green again. And some accounts describe them as being dim, others describe them being bright enough to illuminate the ground underneath them and to cause nearby objects to throw clearly defined shadows. So their light level varies. According to folklore, the lights sometimes follow or approach people and disappear when fired upon with a gun, sometimes very rapidly, only to reappear later on. And anyone who chases the lights and catches them, will never return to tell the tale. There's the hooky mystery part of it. And some witnesses describe the light as appearing to approach them several times before retreating. And others report that the lights were able to keep pace with them when they were in a moving motor vehicle. So it comes close, it goes away, it can follow you when you're driving at 100 kilometers an hour down the road. So there's no satisfactory scientific explanation for them. And they're named after that Min Min Hotel, which burnt down in 1918, and it was a mail exchange, which used to stand on the boundary of two big cattle stations one's called Warrenda and Lucknow, located between the outback towns of Boulia and Winton. And soon after this hotel burnt down, a stockman reported was followed by the light on his journey to Boulia. So, and I'll show you some imagery of what's been reported. So this is a classic, this would be a classic sort of a tale. So here you've got a campground, and these little lights come drifting in. You can see the stockman's hat there, hanging on the fence. These lights are silent; they make no noise at all. This image is of along a track. So here you are out in the deep outback in Australia, and two of these little lights appear and follow you as you travel along. That one's along a dirt road. This one is another reconstruction showing one in more modern times where you've got a thoroughly properly made road and the light appears above and in front of the car. And one more here too. So this is another image or a reconstruction that a witness actually did of what they saw in their rear view mirror. So the rear view mirror is in the top left of the picture with the little white light that's following the car. So very, very interesting. And a lot of it is actually seen in wintertime. So it tends to be more of a winter phenomenon than an actual summer phenomenon. So winter in Australia being June, July and August, that's the time where they most often appear. They're very, very mysterious. And some of the possible explanations are really a bit laughable, in my opinion. So there's been explanation number one, bioluminescence, that the lights may result of insects swarming that have taken on bioluministic characteristics after being contaminated by naturally occurring agents found in local fungi, or species of an owl with its own natural occurring source of bioluminescence. And to date, no one has captured an animal with these characteristics. Well, it's no surprise, because I don't think that's the explanation. Geophysical lights is another explanation. A second hypothesis is that the lights are the results of geophysical phenomena, the classic marsh gas. Marsh gas. However, lights are often reported in areas without geological conditions that are conducive to these phenomena. How can you have marsh gas in a desert? Strange. But the most popular one that gets bandied about all the time is refraction. That the light is actually refraction. And there's a scientist in Australia who works for the University of Queensland. His name's Jack Pettigrew, and he had actually seen the light himself, and he described it as having fuzzy edges like a swarm of bees, moving around with a mind of its own. So they could see he was with a group of other men, and they could see the light, but they could never actually tell what it actually was. And they described it as quite eerie, and that they were actually scared when they'd seen it. But his explanation was that it's fully explainable phenomena, and it says it's to do with mirage imagery. So this being a classic image of a mirage, when you get that appearance of what looks like a water lake, but when you get closer to it, it's really just a light refraction from the sky. And disappointingly, if you're out in that country, it's not water. So, but he takes it one step further and says that this is what's called a Fata Morgana mirage. And this is a classic example of that. So, oops, I'm a bit quick on my picture. So in a Fata Morgana mirage, objects can appear far closer than they are in reality, and can even seem to float above the horizon, like this image here, where a boat is apparently floating above the water. So the obvious explanation, if you're going to say that it is that explanation, is that it's headlights being reflected. But there were no headlights in 1812 or 1850 or 1875. So it definitely cannot be any of those things. And that mystery still continues to this day. And we'll probably even come back to the Min Min lights, because it really is. I could do a whole episode on it alone, and I've got a lot of material on it. But this freestyle is drawing to a close. So I want to talk about Black Mountain. So Black Mountain is another really interesting place in Australia. Very interesting place, if I get my imagery going the right way. It's a place of mystery and legend to Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples in Australia. Located in far north Queensland, a few kilometres inland from the stunning coast, you'll find Black Mountain. And it's actually in a national park, and I'm going to try to pronounce the name. It is the Kalakagiaka National Park. And it's a striking landform of black granite boulders that rise above the surrounding green scenery. And it's been dubbed the Bermuda Triangle of far north Queensland due to stories that date back to the late 1800s of people, horses, and whole mobs of cattle disappearing in the region of Black Mountain. This is not just a tourist promotion show here on Unexplained Australia. No, we look at these mysteries. So, and while the site is in a national park, visitors aren't allowed to climb the mountain. In fact, you're not even advised to approach it. That's by the Park Service, even in this day and age. So other than a lookout just off the road, that's as close as you can get to Black Mountain. And the name, so the traditional owners of the land are the Eastern Kuku-Yalani people, who know the mountain as that Kalakakiyaka, and it translates to place of the spear. It's explained as a sacred battlefield, the scene of the last spear fight between two indigenous clans. So it's a really, really strange place. We're going to a little bit more. We're going to drill down on it. So I've shown you. So that's where it is, Black Mountain. So it's only just north of Cairns, and Townsville's further down, Mackay further down. So right up in far north Queensland. And if you get on Google Maps, that's Black Mountain National Park, and it's all these giant black boulders that make up this really unique mountain. It's really amazing. And when you see it, I'm about to show you now, this is the tourist shot. It's really quite stunning to look at. This big pile of black boulders that sits out there. So in the 1800s, an infamous criminal named Sugarfoot Jack, they were fleeing from the police and they disappeared into Black Mountain and they were never seen again. Never seen again. In 1877, a courier named Grainer, who was horseback riding, searching for all his strayed calf, when his horse, and the cows all disappeared without a trace in 1877. In 1882, Harry Owens, the owner of Oakley Creek Station, rode out one Sunday morning towards the Black Mountain looking for straying cattle. When he didn't return on time, his partner George Hawkins alerted the police and meanwhile went out to look for him on his own. But by the time the police joined the search, Hawkins was gone as well. So the two men disappeared. Two native police trackers entered one of the caves. One had actually came out alive. However, he was so unnerved by his encounter with terror, he could not give a clear account of what happened. During the 1920s, two young European cave explorers decided to solve the mystery of the earlier disappearances. Neither of those two were ever heard from again. 1928, a prospector named Packer went missing while searching for gold or gemstones at Black Mountain. His body was later found with a bullet on his head and his rifle. That's a bit strange. In 1932, a traveller, Harry Page, when hiking to Black Mountain, was reported missing and was later found dead due to unexplained causes. So it's a very, very unusual location, Black Mountain. So there you go. So there are these places around Australia where unique and strange phenomena does occur. Apparently, it has strange magnetic activity up there too, and it can affect. Well, I don't know if it affects aircraft, but it does have some weird magnetic anomaly. So it's definitely a place of mystery. And one day, I'd really like to go there. I've been up to Cairns before, but I haven't made it up to that part of the world. But you have to be assured that Australia is a land that's been here for a very, very, very long time. It's been here for millennia. And within its boundaries, there are places like Black Mountain. There are mysteries like the Min Min Lights. There are these absolutely bona fide, unusual things that do occur here. And that's a wonderful thing, in my opinion. It gives people like me and you the chance to look at these mysteries, explore them. This is what a paranormal freestyle is. It's just getting out there, throwing them up in the air, and giving you a whole lot of different stuff in one episode. So it's not just talking about the Fred Valentich case for an hour. We throw up all these different strange phenomena, and that's just some of the ones that I've found this week. And I thought, oh, that'd be great. Let's do a paranormal freestyle. So thank you very much for joining me on this episode of Unexplained Phenomena Australia. And I really hope you'll join me again next week, where we'll come up with something else that will also be equally interesting. So I bid you all an absolutely fantastic night. And look, all I ask you to do out there is just believe, 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 and explore the mysteries of wherever you are. So until next time, I'll see you then.